Good evening. Have you ever wondered what living in the olden times would be like? Tonight, we will do just that. We will step into another world, another time. You will now join me in my next story, set in the 1800s Victorian London. Before we begin our story, I want you to sit in a quiet, dimly lit room. Close your eyes and imagine this. It's a rainy evening in Victorian London. You are sitting at your window and you can smell the bakery below your house. The owner of the bakery is about to close, and you can hear the big bell from your room as it strikes the hour. You can see people walking below on the road, rushing to get the last of Christmas presents. It's a dark, gloomy evening, but the candles in some shops have lit up the pavement below. You can see a thief running after grabbing a woman's purse and rushes through people. A constable blows his whistle and rushes to catch the thief. The thief falls over by a man holding his foot out to stop him, and the constable catches up to him. The constable thanks the man, and the man takes off his hat and smiles back. Tonight's story is about this man who you're looking at. His name is Richard. Let's begin our story. Sit back, relax, and unwind into the night. Richard was an upcoming bright lawyer in London. He was very famous among his peers, and he had a talent for winning most complicated cases for his firm. He won all of them so far. Richard's boss knew he was young and naive, so he used to make him work twice as hard with some cases, and Richard, being the kind-hearted gentleman he was, agreed to work late into the nights. A few months go by, and Richard was settling into his new life as a lawyer, when one evening, just before he finished, his boss called him into the office and told Richard that there was a case he was working on and wanted Richard to look into it for him. It was for one of their late clients who had passed away, leaving behind quite a huge estate. But due to its importance for the firm, he wanted Richard to help him with it. The client who had died was Sir Leonard. He was extremely wealthy, who used Richard's firm to create a will, and it needed to be actioned upon his death. Sir Leonard's wife lived in the Highlands in Scotland, and for some reason, she has not been responding to Richard's boss's letters she needed to sign, so all the paperwork can be completed for the late husband's will, and the estate can be divided equally between family members. He wanted Richard to travel up to the Highlands and get her to sign all the documents in person so the case can be finally closed. Richard agreed to do this, as he wanted to do this for two reasons. One being, he loved the Highlands and have always wanted to visit the beautiful scenic mountains. And secondly, he would get a chance to visit his family in an old cottage along the way in Yorkshire Dales. A few nights later, Richard packed his suitcase and some of his favorite books and chocolates for his journey. As this would take days, he packed a heavy suitcase. Richard put his suitcase on the pavement, opened up his umbrella, as it was raining that night in London, and waited for the horse carriage, which his firm had sent to take him up to the Highlands. The horse carriage finally arrived. It was 4 beautiful dark horses, a beautiful black dark carriage with lanterns alongside it and inside. All the horses were well groomed, which made it a beautiful sight, even in the dark, gloomy London rain. The coachman greeted Richard and smiled, took his suitcase and stored it in the carriage. Richard stepped in a beautifully decorated carriage and settled in. The coachman whipped the horses, and the carriage started to pass through busy London roads. After some time, they reached the outskirts of London at an inn where they planned to stay the night. The next day, they continued on with their journey, and they finally got halfway into the journey in Yorkshire, where they would stop so Richard could meet his family. The coachman stopped outside Richard's family cottage in the countryside. Richard got off and went into a dimly lit cottage to greet his family members, while the coachman waited outside. The coachman lit up a cigarette and waited for Richard to return. After some time, Richard came back outside, got back in the carriage, and they continued on with their journey. They traveled for many nights and finally got to the Highlands in Scotland. After traveling through the Highlands, they got close to the manor of the widow. Richard was extremely curious to find out what could be the cause for the lady of the manor for not replying to Richard's boss's letters. Looking out the carriage, they passed through the Scottish forest, and Richard took out a bar of chocolate and started to eat. He found that sweet taste very comforting in the dark forest. The road became bumpy, and the lanterns were moving that much that one of the lantern's candles went out. And then they finally came out of the forest, and there it was, the manor in the open estate. It was magnificent, a beautiful manor in the Scottish Highlands with huge gates and a very long drive from the gates to the manor itself. The coachman got to the gates and got off with his lantern. It was foggy, so he couldn't see much. He shouted to ask if anybody was out there. There was no reply, and he tried to push the gates open, but they were locked. Using his lantern to look through the fog, in a distance, he could see a light floating in the air. As it got closer, he saw a man coming towards him. It was the gatekeeper. He asked the coachman if he was lost. The coachman replied that they were not lost and that they were there to see the lady of the manor. And Richard has been sent to deliver some paperwork to her. To that, the gatekeeper replied that they have been expecting them. The gatekeeper got on the carriage with the coachman, and they started from the gate through a long drive until they reached the manor and its main doors. At this time, Richard took out his mirror to make him look more presentable in front of the lady. The carriage stopped at the main entrance, and the gatekeeper got off to knock on the door. A few minutes later, the door opened, and it was the butler. He quickly rushed to open the door of the carriage for Richard and greeted him. He asked Richard to follow him and took his coat. When Richard stepped inside, he saw a magnificent entrance, a huge chandelier hanging from the ceiling, which was beautifully painted, a grand staircase right in the middle, leading to both sides of the manor. The architect was unlike Richard has ever seen before. The butler told Richard to follow him into the guest room. Richard walks in, and it was a beautiful room again, with fire lit up, warm rugs on the floor, a reading chair next to the fire. But this time, it started to rain outside. He asked Richard if he would like anything to drink, and Richard replied he would love a glass of whiskey, a Scottish whiskey. The butler poured some whiskey for Richard, and Richard sat down, warming his hands next to the fire and drinking the whiskey. The butler told Richard that the ladyship will be with him very soon, and closed the door behind him. Richard started to look around the room with beautiful paintings of its previous owners while drinking the whiskey. And after finishing the glass, he sat by the fire again. Richard opened up the documents and started to prepare them for the widow. After a short while, Richard heard footsteps coming to the door, and it was the butler. He told Richard that the ladyship would see him now. Richard stepped outside the room and looked up the grand staircase, and there she was, the lady of the manor, the widow, standing there in a very long black dress, with a widow's black veil covering her face until her lips. Richard could sense the piercing eyes through her veil. She was wearing black gloves, and she had a really strong aura about her. She told Richard that she has been expecting him for some time now. And she said that his boss has sent her letters to inform her that he would be arriving to complete her late husband's will. Richard told her that he would be very grateful if she could sign all the relevant documents so he could be on his way back and get everything completed. She laughed and said, "That can wait, my dear. That can wait." Firstly, she said that they will have a dinner together, and after dinner, they can discuss business. She asked the butler if the dinner table was set, and he replied it was. She walked down the stairs, and Richard was in awe of the lady. Her long black dress flowed behind her on the stairs. As she reached the end of the stairs, Richard could see how beautiful she really was through her veil, which was netted The butler asked them to follow him into the dining area. They both followed him. A long table full of the best food and wine was laid out. The widow sat at one side of the table, and Richard sat on the other side. 2 footmen were appointed to serve the food. Richard was really hungry after a long journey and enjoyed every bit of the food, from the roasted chicken to lamb ribs, and enjoyed the best wine, followed by some great dessert. Richard then followed the widow to the study, and Richard explained that she would get a small cottage on the outskirts of Evimore in the Highlands, and the rest of the estate would go to her late husband's first wife. This is something Sir Leonard, her late husband, had declared on the will. When Richard told the widow this, she was looking outside the window, as now there was a thunderstorm and rain hitting the window outside. When she heard this, she turned round and smiled at Richard and told him he ought to stay the night, as the storm outside was getting worse. Richard explained that he was already late by a day or 2 and needed to get back as soon as possible, as he had other cases he needed to finish, and staying another night would mean it would delay the process. She insisted and asked the butler to make Richard's room for the night. She also asked the butler to send some food for the coachman and get him allocated a room in the servants' quarters. Richard was actually surprised that the widow did not react to any of the news about the estate going to the late husband's ex-wife, apart from the tiny cottage. Richard agreed to stay the night, but asked the widow to sign the documents so he can leave first thing in the morning. However, the widow said that they can wait until the morning, as it was late and he should get some rest. The widow picked up her lantern and told Richard to follow him, as she would personally show him his room. Richard followed her up the grand stairs and walked for some time until they reached a room at the far corner of the manor. She opened its doors and led him into the room. It was a very dark room with very old furniture and curtains. She told Richard that it was a pleasure to meet him, and he can now rest for the night. She left Richard, and he started to feel very uneasy in that room. But he tried to put that creepy feeling about the room behind him. And after the long journey he's had, he just wanted to sleep. And especially with a full stomach of great food and wine. Richard closed his eyes and went to bed. He went to sleep fast, and even though the thunderstorm outside and the lightning were loud, it did not matter to him, because he was really, really tired. After a few hours, late into the night, Richard opened up his eyes and felt something was just different. He looked around and was scared and speechless. He was not on his bed. He was in the same room, but not on his bed. He was floating in midair, and when he looked around, he could see the manor staff all around him, in black hooded robes, holding candles and chanting away. He then looked above him, and there she was, the widow, with long hair flowing in the air, her veil removed as she chanted. She came close to Richard's face and told him that she was actually a witch. And she told Richard that the reason he is floating is that she has set a spell upon him. And if he doesn't do what she says, he will die. She whispers into his ears that the spell would only break if he would kill the late husband's first wife, so all the estate can be hers. Richard started to tremble with fear and didn't know what to say or do, as he could not move his body due to the spell. She told Richard that she did not kill her husband, and until this day, she doesn't know what had happened to him, but she will kill him if he doesn't do as she says. Richard agreed to this and closed his eyes. When Richard woke up, he was in the carriage, shaken up, going back through the dark forest outside the manor. Richard started to scream when he woke up, and the coachman stopped, got off, and held Richard, and told him that he was also spellbound, and has been told to help Richard kill the first wife, and if he doesn't, he will be killed too. They finally reached London. As per the witch's orders, they were not to reveal anything to anybody. Richard made an appointment to see the late client's first wife and took the poison pouch with him as he was given by the witch. He went and saw the late husband's wife and sat down. As they were given some tea to drink, she got up to get some biscuits from the tea trolley, and Richard dipped the poison in her tea, and after drinking it, she died instantly. Richard ran from the house while her staff tried to catch him. Richard had the coachman waiting outside and got into the carriage, and they left as soon as they could. Richard was now a wanted man in London. He travelled back to the manor and finally got there with the coachman. They searched the manor for the widow and the staff, but it was empty. They looked throughout the manor, but could not find anybody. Then, not so far away from the manor, Richard was looking through the window and saw a fire lit in the forest. They went there and saw everybody dancing around it, and the witch floating in midair. They were all chanting for the devil to appear. The widow was an evil witch who had many under her spells. Richard fell to the ground and asked her to remove the spell that bounded him and the coachman, as they have done what she wanted them to do. She laughed and told them if they really thought that she was telling the truth, that they would be free. She told them that they were hers forever, and she was going to keep them in the manor as their slaves. The chanting started to get louder and louder to summon the devil, and now everyone was floating in the air around the fire, with the witch's hair growing longer and longer, her laughs getting louder and louder, while Richard and the coachman were on their knees looking up at them. And then, all of a sudden, the chanting stopped. It was complete silence. They turned around and looked at Richard, because now he was the one who was chanting something they have never heard before. They all started to tremble with fear. Richard got up from his kneeling position and stood straight up. And now the coachman was trembling with fear too, more than ever before. And so was everybody else. Richard's face was changing. His body was changing. His head was changing. There were horns coming out of Richard's head, and his eyes were fiery red. Richard then screamed, and everybody in midair fell to the ground, including the witch. And they were all kneeling down. He told them that he was the devil, evil of all evils, with many names. He was the one that they were seeking. He fell in love with the witch when she called upon him the very first time, and has been following her ever since. He was the one who killed her late husband and found his way into London and became a lawyer at her late husband's firm. He came close to the witch, who was now kneeling down, held her face in his hands, and told her that she was now his bride. He carried her into his arms and started to float away to the manor, while the others now started chanting behind him, and the dance around the fire started again, celebrating the arrival of their master. The devil himself. The cottage he visited that night in the countryside was actually an abandoned cottage with demons living in it. Good night.